Okay guys, today I'm going to show you how to make a square-ish casserole dish. A lot of people see a square casserole dish and they don't think it's made on the wheel, but we're going to show you how to do that. So I'm usually not so picky about my bats, but I do think with this square casserole, you really want to make sure that you have a bat that's not loose on the pins. It's okay for it to be a little warped, but you want to put it on the wheel going concave. This is about 4 pounds of clay. Go ahead and get started. 4 pounds of clay is going to give me about a 3-inch wall in the end and about a 12-inch length if you get all the clay. Again, locking my left elbow into my hip bone, using the weight of my body to push that clay forward. I'm going to cone by pushing my left palm towards my right 4 fingers, putting pressure towards the middle, and then the clay will go up, and then you're going to follow it up into a cone. And try not to let that close up. Pop some air bubbles along the way. People ask, how often do you have to cone? There is no definitive amount of times. It's really just until you've reorganized the clay to be useful. Now, even though I'm going to be opening up a very wide cylinder, I don't want to center really wide. It's really hard to center short and wide clay. So I first center it tall and narrow, and then I'll start to sort of convince the clay that it's going to come out a little. So right now I'd say that this is pretty centered. Clean this off a little bit here. That's going to help me when I'm starting to expand the diameter of the clay. Now I'm not just going to push down unevenly. I'm going to have my hand collecting the clay as it starts to ooze out. So I'm going to push down on the center with the side of my hand, and the clay starts to want to go out because it has nowhere else to go. And then my left hand is collecting it. But what is super important about how it's collecting it is that it's collecting it at this angle. If I have my hand going this way, we're gonna get some air under here. It's gonna look almost like one of those curling discs. So we want it to be straight on the edges. So what these fingers are doing is pushing this lump in as I start to expand the clay. My bat is a little wonky, so I'm going to go a little slower, maybe about 85% of the speed of the wheel. Again, pushing down on the center until the clay starts to ooze out. And if I want to, I can start to sort of bring my hand back. Sometimes my fist helps a little. And what I want to be doing is expanding the diameter of this mound of clay into the actual size that I want. Now, one of the things to know about what we're going to be making is when I open this cylinder up, I'm going to open all the way down to the bat. So all of this clay that would be used for the floor can actually become part of the wall because it's not going to be wasted in making the floor. We're going to attach the floor later. So I can really, really, really go low with this mound of clay. So the tricky part about using a bat is deciding whether you're going to go wider than the holes, than the pins, or if you're going to stay within the pins. I'm going to go wider. Okay, so now I've got myself, this is a 12-inch bat, so I've got myself about a 10-inch mound of clay. I'm just gonna go ahead and just sort of compress that a little bit. It's okay that I've got that divot down on the bottom, because remember, I don't need to save this clay because it's gonna be part of the walls. Now, if my clay here is about 1.5 inches to 1 inch high, I'm gonna be able to take all of this and thin this out and make it about 3 inches. So how do I open this up? I'm gonna use my sponge, super wet. I'm gonna push down into the center with several fingers. So I'm trying out the new Aura ring, and this is the thing to see if I'm comfortable or not, and it just made a mark on my pot. All right, a little side piece of note for you, a lot of side piece of information for you. All right, so as you can see, I'm going straight down until I see the black or dark brown of my bat. Now, the key to opening this up is that we don't want this clay to start to fold up. I may actually take this ring off. So I'm going to start to pull open, but I'm going to compress with this hand. See, this is starting to stick up, so this sponge is pushing it right back into the clay. This is where a loose bat is not going to be your friend. So I'm actually doing is I'm kind of squeezing the clay between these two fingers. Especially if my bat is a little wonky. And if you don't go completely clean on the floor, it's okay. You just want to do it almost evenly though. I did leave a little bit of clay in there. I take my thumb or rib, or I would normally just leave this on here because I could take it off later, but I want you guys to actually see the darkness. The darks of their eyes. Okay. So what I do want to do is I want to leave this sort of scoop in here. That scoop, that clay over here, is going to help me attach it to the base when I start. So I've actually gotten it the width that I want, and down here is a little thinner. I'm kind of squeezing a little. So now I'm going to start to pull. What I think is super important is that when you're pulling, you don't pull out. You want to pull straight up and down. When we create this into a square or a rectangle, you want those walls to be perpendicular to the table. So again, I'm going to go ahead and almost throw as if I'm throwing a cone. Very wide cone. Putting more pressure down on the bottom, a little less on the top until I really get the height I want. In order to keep the wall straight when we are creating it into a square, you want to have a pretty thick lip. I talk all the time about how you have this thick lip on this bucket, and that's what keeps this stable. It's the same thing on a pot. The thinner your lip, the more likely it is to warp. Since we are going to be manipulating this clay a little bit, we're going to want that a little thick. We're going to want the whole thing thick, especially because maybe you are going to bake with this or carry something super heavy in it. So thin is not always desirable. So I'm going to start to straighten that out. I might have gotten this a little higher than what I wanted, so I probably could have went out a little bit more. But you can't ever. Maybe we'll make it into a planter instead of a casserole dish. Sort of manipulating it to make it a little wider, but you've got to be careful and make sure it doesn't fold over here on the outside. So I like to leave finger marks in my casseroles / planters. You guys know I either carve it or I use one glaze. I'm a big fan of texture, so I'll use my fingertips. And then I'm going to stop here so that you can really see that rim. I'm going to wipe away the inside just because when I do go ahead and cut this off, I want that inside to be clean. Now I have no intention of trimming this pot. So I want to get off as much as possible, and I want it to go straight up and down. I don't want that angle that I do with bowls. I'm going to go in here, take off just enough so that I can just use my fingers to smooth it out. Now I am not going to wire this off now. I'm going to let it set up until it's manipulatable. So when is that? Well, ideally, these are types of things you want to do hours apart from each other. There's a very sweet spot of when your clay is flexible enough to manipulate, well, dry enough to manipulate without it wobbling as you're moving the walls, in between when it's way too dry to manipulate, where it starts to crack. So depending on the weather, depending on how thickness, I really can't give you a definitive time. It's about 40 degrees here in New Jersey, and I'm gonna leave this wide open with the heat on. I'm gonna say in about 2 to 3 hours, I'm gonna be able to wire this off and start to manipulating it. I guess we'll see you in 2 to 3 hours. Okay, so I've wired this off of my bat, and I was very sure to go as flat as I could. And as you can tell, I've also left quite a bit on the bottom. So that 3/4 of the inch created by my fingers when I was pulling it will create enough surface area to apply it to my slab. So how do we shape this? What we want to decide is how narrow or how wide we want our rectangle or square. So I'm just going to gently grab it with 2 hands, just sort of squeeze it in a little. So at this point, you can tell that our clay is just hard enough to touch it without it becoming flimsy, but it's dry enough so that when I move this part of it, everything flows with it. So if you're interested in oval, there you go, an oval. But we're aiming for sort of a square. I've decided I want it to be about 5 inches wide on the bottom. So there's a couple of methods. If you've got one of these paddles around, you can go ahead and just sort of ease it in. I prefer to use the table. So what I'm gonna do is turn it on its side gently, and I'm gonna decide about that 5 inches, and I'm just gonna sort of squish it in there. So you can see that I've got my first angle. Now I'm gonna do the opposite side, because my hands are already placed in that sort of 5-inch method there, 5-inch distance. A little wider. So now I've got 2 of my sides. I'm not going to aggressively make it into a straight edge yet. I'm going to turn it this way. Go ahead and get this side. Then I'm going to turn it and do this side. Now I'm just going to finesse it, sort of work on, getting those sides pretty much the same length on either side. So I can do that again with the paddle, push it up against the side, get myself a real nice right angle. And if I use the paddle as a measurement, I know that the angle, the corner is going to be at the top of that and the bottom of that. I'm going to go here and push that in a little, holding my sides. The other way you can do this is to use any sort of straight edge. So we have a lot of clipboards here in the studio. I might be blocking that. Push it up against there. This way, this sort of does any height wall that you may have. I'm gonna really sort of push those corners in. A little wonky here. I always tend to do this a little bit better when nobody's watching. Okay. So you're going to notice that by having these sides perpendicular to the bat, I'm getting this nice straight edge. It's just a little easier than when they flare out a little bit. Notice that my thick rim is actually helping to hold its shape. So I'm going to move that to the side, and I'm going to pull over my slab of clay that I've done on my slab roller. It's about a 1/2 centimeter thick. My slab roller is in centimeters. And I just want to place it. Remember, I don't want to put it in the middle because maybe I can make another one and put it next to it. I'm going to go ahead and place that where I want it. I've got my jar of slip. I've got a knife. Some people use a fettling knife. This knife comes in a 3-pack at Stop and Shop. I really like them. I buy them all of them every time they have them. It's got like a nice blade to it. It's close to the blade to the handle, so I have a little bit more angle. And I've got my serrated rib. So I'm not going to cut first. Cutting first is, if I have to finesse this a little bit, I'm not gonna have anything left. So I'm just gonna gently score around the edge with my knife, just to kind of give me a little bit of a guidance as to where I'm gonna be scoring. Okay, I'm going to gently flip this over. I'm gonna take my serrated rib, score this. Place this to the side. And I'm going to score right inside that line that I've created. I'll be a little careful with this because this line is going to help me replace the walls once I'm ready to do that. Remember, don't be too stingy with your scoring. Go ahead and slip this. I'm gonna speed this up a little for you. I'm actually scoring the walls as well. I just will add a camera here. Now that I've got the base and the walls scored, I'm going to gently place this onto the slab exactly where I left it. All good. I'm going to place it exactly where I want it before I really secure it into its spot. Get those angles, because once you commit, you're committed. I'm just gonna, now that I think I've got my shape, if you're that type of person who needs to use a straight edge or a right angle, go for it. I'm not that type of human. I'm just gonna go ahead and squish that in. Now the next part is optional, but I'm actually a big fan of it. I'm gonna get rid of this excess here. I'm gonna move this over to my right a little. Now what I like to do is secure the inside with a little coil, sort of like caulking. So in case I get any separation, I know that I'm giving it a little stretching room. Doesn't have to be a big coil. Super skinny like this is totally fine. And I'm gonna go in here and just sort of score those corners. I'm hoping you can see this. I'm gonna just start to place this in and squish it. My hand is gonna counter pressure on the outside. And this coil, although it may not look long enough, is actually gonna stretch as I go around. So I may only need 2 of these. Remember, you want to do all of this with the clay similar dryness. gonna go ahead with my finger. I'm just gonna sort of smooth that out. My hand on the outside, counter pressuring. Okay, so now I'm gonna let this set up. I'm not gonna cut this yet, and when it's all ready to cut, I'll see you in a bit.